Alright, bit of a freebie video here. Why is it a freebie? Because I don't have to think of the question to answer. So, Seppo's dropped a comment here. If your name's on it, then there's no shade here. I'm sharing knowledge. This is a good jump off point. Alright, so Seppo, he's dropped a comment, and there's some parts that are worth expounding on. So, the cars are showing promise to bring the field closer, as evidenced by every team being able to score points. Yet we've not seen the kinds of overtaking the fans were longing for. Here's the thing about overtaking in Formula One. There's a double-edged sword to it. So why were the 2014 to 2016 era regulations problematic for Formula One? They were problematic for Formula One not because there was too much overtaking, but because Mercedes made a car that was too good. Okay, now if Mercedes did not make a car that was that good, those regulations would probably still be in play today, because those cars solved the overtaking issue, as it were. How did they solve the overtaking issue? Because the wings, the front wing and rear wing, were solved. They solved them. Right, the advertisers were happy with the space that they had. The teams could sell relevant spaces, and that's a very important dynamic to actually consider. That there's money tied into these wing planes now, so they're not so easy to remove. Because ideally, you would just remove them, get rid of the wings, go full ground effects. There's a lot of things you could do, but chiefly, if you wanted to improve overtaking, you would get rid of the wings. The 14 to 16 regulations were useful because they minimized the the front and rear wing impact, and with DRS as well, they made overtaking very easy. The problem with that, with making overtaking easy, is that any team that's made the fastest car is just gonna overtake anyone who's slower in front of them and just go win the Grand Prix, and it's gonna look easy. In extreme cases, you can even make qualifying superfluous, because overtaking is functionally easier. So there's a double-edged sword to overtaking. You do need it to be difficult. You really do need it to be difficult to some degree. The lead car needs to have some notable advantage over the following car in a quote-unquote overtake scenario. Now, that advantage has been skewed lately with DRS, and people still want more overtaking. It is what it is. I get it. There's perhaps a difference now. Some people want F1 to be consumed, but I digress. Philosophical differences on that. But that's the thing with overtaking. If you want to solve it, you get rid of the wings. You can't really get rid of the wings because there's too much money attached to the wings, and they're one of the cheapest parts of the cars to manufacture. So not only do they make a lot of money, but they're cheap to make. so they're great on both ends. So and I don't know if it's a dirty little secret or not, but they're also the cheapest performance modifier relative to other formula. It's gonna be really hard to lobby to get rid of them. There's a lot of things you could replace them with. We could discuss them. You know, like ground effects with active suspension as well, or even a full body active aero with the wings gone and you just got winglets. You could do some really kinky things with the cars, but it's neither here nor there, because you're never going to get rid of the front and rear wings unless something revolutionary happens with car design sometime soon. So will you ever solve overtaking? No. Do you want to solve overtaking? Depends what type of racing you're actually going to get, and you're probably not going to get the type of racing that you want. Side by side, every corner, no one really has the advantage. There is no line on the circuit. You're not going to get that type of racing. That's too far away. That's like, I don't know. Mind you, we are at a tech revolution right now, maybe like 2 tech revolutions away. But I digress. It's neither here nor there. It's definitely not McLaren's 2050 thing. Maybe 2100. Optimistically, 2150. Realistically. But that's far away. And if you solve overtaking currently, you just get 2014, 2015, 2016 again. And people lose their brains in a different way if someone just has a faster car, because that's what it's gonna look like. So yeah, that's the overtaking situation in F1. I think overtaking's in a good spot, quite frankly. It's in a very great spot right now. Likewise, following cars, right? It's perhaps very track sensitive. The following cars detail, perhaps it is very track sensitive, but I do like how the current formula looks relative to what I've seen. Now, as for why the previous ground effects era was stopped, they used to use skirts back in those days to seal the floors. Right now, those were outlawed. Why were they outlawed? Because what the skirts did is they did what the Mercedes car is trying to do. If you catch my drift. But what they did is they sealed the floor. They attached the floor to the road surface. And they were, what were they made of? Rubber top, something? They're made of something expendable, really easy to replace. And so they would ride with the car's ride height itself. Now, the reason that they were banned was because sometimes they would just detach for whatever reason. Sometimes in the corner, maybe the car goes a bit too slow. And because those cars, just by the way, those ground effects era cars, the first era, they had more. How do I word this? In terms of how much ground effects they were producing, that was relative to modern cars, and I'm talking modern cars like recent, just this past generation that we've passed 2017 to 2021. I'm talking relative to those cars. Now these 2022 cars, they're not pushing the ground effects as much as those cars. Those cars fall down on raw performance. They don't have the engine technology or the tire technology that the modern cars have, or just the fundamental aerodynamic understandings, and as so far as the overbody of the car goes, they don't have that in those old cars. They do have a functional and good understanding, but it's not that. And they don't have the fabrication knowledge either, But just, a tarp and some sawed out Venturi tunnels in the garage, and boom, you're one of the best cars on the grid. At least that's what it was in those days. And that got banned because it would detach in some corners, and they were cornering at really high speeds, right, relative to what the cars were actually capable of. They were cornering at very high speeds with this ground effect stuff and the tarp to seal the floor. So when it detached and someone goes crashing off into a barrier somewhere, or the barriers were much closer to the circuit as well, but when it detaches, it was a bit of a mess. probably a dead driver. So, so they had to, tame that. So they removed the whole thing. They said, the underfloor is gonna be flat. There's no skirts, and that was ground effects done. Now, as for current cars, what is the solution to porpoising in general? The active suspension is a good solution, but you actually have to let teams design around that, so you can only introduce it in the off season. That is a very good solution. I forget where I first heard it, if it was FF1 or F1-4, but that is a very good solution. Will they actually do that? No. That and if they do actually do that, well, the active suspension might solve overtaking in a weird way, with some weird interaction with the ground effects cars. But will they actually open up active suspension? No, that would make the cars too fast, and well, they don't have the tire technology for that, and they probably don't have the brake technology for it either. Well, that would be a little faster in the corner, so it would actually make the brakes easier. But otherwise, they don't have the tire technology for an active suspension formula. And if they were to try to make a tire that can wear out, quote unquote, over a stint distance for that formula, they would have a lot of trouble doing that. They would have a lot of trouble. They would wish for Bridgestone to come back with their hockey puck tires and we just go racing 100% push all the way. They would wish for that. So they can't do the active suspension thing. That, number one, they can't do. So what other solutions do they have? A minimum ride height. But here's the thing with the minimum ride height. Why exactly do teams want a minimum ride height to be implemented? That's the question you have to ask before you implement a minimum ride height. And why is that? That's because, well, who would you think is running their car the lowest? Who would you seriously? Who would you think is running their car the lowest? And who is pushing for a minimum ride height to be introduced? Who's pushing for that? Because it's probably the same team that's running their car the lowest. Now, why are they? And by they I'm talking about Mercedes. And what Mercedes have tried to do with their floor design, they've tried to get cheeky with it, just to understand it. They've tried to make a hard body version of the floor ceiling skirts from the first ground effects era. That's what they've tried to do. So to do that, you have to run the car very, very low. So they run the car the lowest on the grid. Right? Red Bull don't run the car as low as them. I mean, they would probably be above whatever the minimum ride height restriction is. You know, they'd be well above it. And they could introduce a minimum ride height tomorrow. They could do it tomorrow. They just put a laser sensor, a laser height sensor on the weighbridge, and boom, they can police ride height at any time. They could do that tomorrow. Snap of a finger. But there's a weird split in the teams. Of course, if you need to know who is lobbying against the minimum ride heights, it's Red Bull, AlphaTauri, and Alpine. Now, why are they doing that? Because they're not having porpoising issues. They can run the car lower if the circuit is suited to it. And that scares all these guys who are breaking their drivers' backs, running the cars lower. to find performance. And that scares them because now they're going to come to a circuit, I don't know, it could be Singapore or something, where they have to ride the car higher. It could be Belgium, like, it could be Spa going into Eau Rouge. So there's dynamics coming up in the season that, well, you can't really say what's going to happen one way or the other, because we haven't seen cars like this in F1, and we don't know how sensible the teams and the drivers will be. Probably not sensible. They proved to not be sensible with regularity, so they'll probably not be sensible. They'll run their cars lower to find performance gains, trying to hide how bad their cars are, perhaps. Who knows? So if everyone is restricted to a minimum ride height, okay, now everyone's playing the same game, quote unquote, and it's in bad taste to me. It's in bad taste to me. For me personally, I wouldn't sanction some mandated minimum ride height. I wouldn't do that. And quite frankly, some of these teams need to be smarter with their solutions, or perhaps not smarter, just simpler with their solutions. But I'm not inside these things. I'm just talking as a fan outside. Red Bull seems to have a really simple solution to me. Everyone's tried to finesse them in some way, and I don't really think they can be finessed. Mind you, Red Bull aren't actually, as the picture's showing, Red Bull aren't actually running the car low enough for these things to need to be in play all that often. So, how much performance is there to come out of the Red Bull, really? And if they do lower the car, do they actually lose out by doing so? So it goes both ways on these things. It goes both ways. And it's just not in good taste to introduce a minimum ride height at this point of the season. If, I don't know, if 15 races in, it's still a major issue, then okay, sure, maybe introduce a minimum ride height. Maybe. Like, you can start debating it at that point, if it's still an issue. But I really expect these teams to be on top of this. And Baku is a very unique circuit regardless, right? Baku is a very niche environment to put Formula One cars in. So I wouldn't really take all the porpoising that was seen at Baku as gospel. Yeah, this is that part of the calendar, one of those parts of the calendar. One of those. Is it one of those? Or is it just that exclusive one part of the calendar? I have to investigate that. Well, this is that part of the calendar where, yeah, you might be racing on difficult roads. So can your car do that? And, well, the Mercedes can't. That's just the bottom line. Perhaps even breaking their drivers' backs at the same time. They just can't do that. That is what it is. And there's other cars on the grid who can't do that. And they can, quite frankly, just be more sensible about how they set up the car. Red Bull have been sensible about it. Although, mind you, I do wish this picture of the Red Bull, I do wish the car was a little more further ahead in the frame, but anyway, I would like to see the back end of that car. As for what could solve Mercedes' solution, repackage the car. Yeah. It's really, because this packaging is so it's so exotic. Like, it's so exotic. There's no analog for it. It's not like it's it's not like it's just kinky like the Ferrari, right? It's not like it's just, oh, you've done something really interesting. Yeah, it's not that. It's just completely different. It's a completely different spec. So, so what solutions can you actually put on the car? I don't know. Their underfloor does have a double kick in it, so perhaps you smooth that out. Who knows? I don't know if the car actually works the same if you do that. You know, I don't have that knowledge. Right? Only Mercedes know what they're actually dealing with. They're the only ones that know. And whatever solutions anyone can point out, like, it doesn't really matter one way or the other, because there's so many ramifications for any changes you actually make. Even if you change the underfloor shape and you remove one of the kicks and it's now a single kick floor, well, what exactly does that mean? Do the internals have to move around for that? Like, there's ramifications either way, and it's packaged so tightly already. It's packaged so tightly already that it frankly looks like they have to find a mechanical solution in the suspension, and it's not going to be in modifying the floor if they don't want to actually change how their Venturi tunnels are shaped. Right, that's just the way it is. Very high downforce spec car. It's got too much downforce for well, what they can fabricate. It's just got too much downforce. And it's problematic that the Mercedes in particular is problematic because how do I explain this? It's lifting the tires off the road in some parts. It's really lifting them off the road. And you can see the drivers actually losing control of the car at some moments. And all I wonder to myself is, well, why do you have to run the car that low? Just lift it up a bit. You know, you have a little cheeky way to seal the floor, so see how far you can exploit that by raising the car up and making it more drivable. But, you know, that would just be how I approach it. And, you know, you ever encountered speedrunners? You know, if you're into gaming, you know, you have a story, a single player game that you really like or something, and then you find a speedrunner of it or something, you know, and they're obsessed with speed. It must all be fast. Oh, what's that? Is it fast? That's the only concern, right? Speed. Seconds. Where do I find time? That's the only thing that's of concern. And the easiest way for the Mercedes to find speed is to lower the car. And I'm sure internally the most valuable data that Mercedes would want is the car at its lowest ride height that you can drive the car at. Why are they doing it this aggressively? I don't know. It's just development season for them. It's just figure out the actual path forward for them. Because the thing about the Mercedes situation, everyone's situation really, is they can still get it wrong. You can get it wrong, and you'll be stuck with that wrong solution for a while. But Mercedes, here's the thing about Mercedes. We still have to see how the car shakes up at other traditional circuits. Right, these have been street circuits that we've gone to. Some really wild street circuits. Canada is also classified as a street circuit. It's also a wild circuit in its own way. Here's something that if one should consider going into Canada. The brakes of these cars, they're going to be at their limit in Canada. Now, we saw brakes catching fire early on in the season. Well, in a lot of free practice sessions, and I believe in Bahrain. But we did see brakes catching fire. So I don't know what cooling solutions the teams have open to them for brake cooling, especially with the wheel caps on now. You know, I don't know what solutions they have to them in regards to brake cooling, but there better be some very smart solutions for this Canadian Grand Prix, or well, we might see some interesting things. Maybe a brake disc explodes. I wonder what that would look like. With these wheel caps on the car. I really wonder what that would look like. In all honesty, like, it's a bit morbid, but we'll probably find out, right? It'll probably happen. But Canada, it's a well-designed circuit, though. They'll have a way out. They'll have an exit strategy if it does so happen. But otherwise, the porpoising, there's no fix for porpoising. If I go with Adrian Newey's gospel, and I buy into his gospel right now, because the Red Bull, it does also porpoise. They just don't run the car that low. Is all. There's an aerodynamic consequence of having those ice skates that Red Bull have. There's an aerodynamic consequence in regards to air under the floor, so you do also have to be kind of smart about where you place them. And I don't think teams have been smart enough about where they've placed them, or conventional enough. You have to be conventional yet smart. And I don't think teams have really done that. I don't think Mercedes have done that. I haven't been able to catch a peep under these cars. They're very dark on TV. Very dark, very shady all the time. I haven't been able to catch a peep. And Red Bull are not running their car low enough to get their skid sparking. So it's all a bit up in the air right now in regards to what teams are going to do to quote-unquote solve porpoising. And you don't solve porpoising, you just make it tolerable, or you learn how to live with it. And Mercedes, if they're really committed to this zero pod concept, if they're really committed to it, they might just learn to live with it. All bets are on the table right now. Nothing's out of the question for Mercedes. Really, consider that for a second. Nothing is out of the question. And if it breaks the driver, it's fine, there's another driver. If the concept is worth pursuing to that extent, then yeah, there'll be another driver. I don't know who they have now. I don't think it's Gary Paffett. It might be fake newsing that. But they do have some reserve driver. And then they've got Nick DeVries as junior driver. So, they could even call Esteban Ocon, he would jump. Oh, they might call Romain Grosjean. Well, controversially, they might call Romain Grosjean up. Whoa. That would be wild. But, there's a lot of things that could happen. But the thing to consider for these teams, especially the manufacturers, it's a dirty little secret. The drivers are expendable. There's another guy that's ready to drive. He might not be as fast out the box, but we think we can get him there and maybe past that. Every team has these drivers in stock, so this is the game. That's the game. Now, why Sir Lewis is opting into running the car as low as he is running it, if the data is worth it, then the data is worth it, but it's questionable to me. I would just sacrifice some of that absolute raw performance in the corners where the car can handle it for some driver, but I'll just sacrifice that personally. But I'm not an F1 driver, so I shouldn't really be listened to on this. It's just the way it is. But this Mercedes, it is unique. It is one of a kind. The Red Bull you can copy. The Ferrari you can maybe copy on a high budget. But that Mercedes, you can't copy that. You can't copy it. You have to learn it yourself. It's such a unique thing that they've done, that if they actually do unlock it, then it becomes a major problem. Ferrari, they can get, they they can get kinky with it. But Red Bull, they've now got their own powertrain situation, so they can start getting kinky with it like that. But that'll be an expensive project. That you need some very smart people in the building for that type of project. And that's the thing people don't get about Formula One and the budget caps and all of that. And even this is in Zeko's comments here. And that's the thing, the teams are not separated by the money. They're not separated by track time or CFD time or anything. Or wind time, they're not separated by that. They're separated by how smart people in the building are. That's the only thing they're separated by. And also, as a multiplier to that, how ambitious the people are in the building. And that goes all the way top through bottom. So Mercedes, they've been really ambitious with their concept here. Overly ambitious to me. They could have waited a year or two for this. Although, who knows? The regulations might not be here for that long, right? Considering the 14 to 16 regulations with just that 3 years. It's another double-edged sword, just like the overtaking thing. You can come in with a really ambitious concept that might be difficult to unlock. And if you manage to unlock it, well, no one can copy it. They have to learn how to do it themselves. It's a completely different ballpark. That's a completely different ballpark. The Red Bull, you've seen with Racing Martin, you can copy it. And you're not really restricted on how smart the people are in the room. You're just restricted on how functional the people are in the room. And Adrian Newey is a very functional guy. That's why he's still using pen and paper. That's why he's still using pencil and paper. Everyone's gone digital, and he's still quite literally at the drawing board. So there's aerodynamic understandings that he has that he can't really teach to the guys nowadays. They're too arcane for him himself to teach. But he can communicate philosophy, right? His design philosophy, and people seem to have latched onto it, seen some real value in it, and that's why we see the Racing Martin car. But to his understanding, well, you can't get rid of porpoising. So how do you tame porpoising? Have more responsible F1 teams. That's probably the main solution that you would be looking for. Have more responsible Formula One teams. Maybe more responsible drivers. But whatever Mercedes are doing, I can only assume that it is quote unquote worth it. I can only assume that. And I can only assume that they believe they can unlock it. If they can't unlock it, then do they lose that much time? No, I don't think so, because they'll have unique understandings from having attempted a very unique concept. And everyone else, they'll have similar understandings, but they won't have any type of X factor. Mercedes will have those understandings and some change on top of that. And then next season, after finishing third in the Constructors' Championship this season, they'll have some more development time to play with and maybe get a little more exotic on their concepts. So, well, this is the way it will go with the budget caps. This is the way it will go, at least. The money just makes things a little easier, but it's not about money. And we're gonna see that as the formula goes on. You're gonna have Williams always having the largest budget, not really going anywhere with it. Well, I wouldn't want that to happen to them, but that's what I expect to happen to them. I don't see a reason to assume otherwise. Haas likewise. So what actually separates the teams? The smarts in the room. And Mercedes, they probably got the smartest people on the grid. So they'll have better solutions than whatever we have here on this here webosphere. You best believe that. They've probably thought of these, put them in their simulations, and well, either it's worked or it hasn't, who knows. But to me, it does look like if you are going to change anything fundamental about the car, that it's a project. Yes, they do have vanity pods from the Barcelona, but those are vanity pods, right? They just look like fully like a side pod that's really being used. They just look like that. They're not actually that. Does that actually change things in their car? I don't think so. I wouldn't believe so. If Mercedes are not busting them out, then I wouldn't believe so. I would even believe it makes the car too slow for them to be able to perhaps motivate for. So it's a very strange dynamic at Mercedes. I wouldn't. You see, this is the thing. Now the video's been going on for a while. I wouldn't pay too much attention to this Mercedes thing this season. I wouldn't pay too much attention to it. It's an interesting side story, but it's not the story. It's not really the story. The story is probably gonna be Perez. I don't know what's gonna happen with Perez this season. Strange things are happening around him. Him being told no fighting on the radio and all. So it's a little. The optics are gonna be a little difficult. But all that aside, it's a long season. Things can still happen. I'm finding some weird oddities in how the engines are being counted, but I'm not gonna think about it too much for now. That should be the video. I hope you perhaps got some type of answer from this. Those old ground effects cars are really different type of animals. And they really are. If they introduced that concept of car today, well, I don't know, lap times would probably go up like 4 seconds with present cars if they were allowed to have variable skirts on their cars. It would be a madness. It would be a madness. The tires, they would have to bring back those grooved Bridgestones. Well, not the grooves specifically, but those tires without the grooves cut into them. They have to bring those back because the tires would get absolutely chewed up. Absolutely chewed up. So they can't do the skirts. If they could do the skirts, teams would raise the cars. I actually think. I don't think they'd be riding them solo. They would raise the cars. But those cars, they also porpoised. Like, this is the thing about ground effects cars that Adrian Newey said. This is the thing. You're not gonna get rid of porpoising. It's always gonna be there if you're doing a ground effects car. And it's not that ground effects was solved in that first ground effects there. It wasn't solved at all. Well, it was probably solved with the fan car. That's when it was solved, and then they banned the fan car, and then Chaparral did their 2J, and then that was the new fan car. It is what it is. But the fan car does solve quote unquote ground effects. Ergo, no one will have a problem with sealing their floor. It does solve that. Will they unlock that at some point? I don't ever believe they'll let that be legal. If they let that be legal, we're probably in the 2168s, you know, and you know, the next turn of cars after this current turn of cars is going to is going to be the first no wheels cars, wheelless cars or something, floating cars, flying cars. That's going to be the first generation of racing cars that are flying cars. And then all bets are off then. And then they'll probably like do a last hurrah with, we can have fan cars. The last time we get to see it. With tires. And then they get the film. And then boom, we're doing flying cars now. It's Formula Zero, it's F-Zero. But I digress. That's the vid. Peace.
Hell breezy. Let me show you how to keep the dice rolling when you're doing that thing over there, homie. Hey, let's go! Cause I'm feeling like I'm running and I'm feeling like I gotta get away. Better know that I don't and I won't ever stop. Cause you know I gotta win every day. Go! See, really wanna pop me. Go! Just know that you will never flop me. And I know that I gotta be a little cocky. Go! You ain't never gonna stop me. Every time I come, a nigga gotta set it, then I gotta go, and then I gotta get it, then I gotta blow, and then I gotta shut it. Any little thing a nigga think that he be doing, cause it doesn't matter, cause I'm gonna dead it. Then I'm gonna murder everything and anything about it. Boom, about a bing. I gotta do a lot of things to make it clearer to a couple niggas that I always win, and then I gotta get it again and again and again. And I be doing it to death, and now I move a little foul. Nigga better call a rap, and everybody know my style. Niggas know that I'm the best when it comes to doing this, and I be banging on my chest, and I bang in the east, and I banging in the west, and I kinda give you more, and I will never give you less. You will hear it in the street, and you can read it in the press. Do you really wanna know what's next? Let's go. See the way we on it, and we all up in the race, and you know we gotta go now try to keep up with the pace. And we struggling and hustling and set it, and I get it, and we